The cold, oppressive air was thick with the stench of something wrong. It was that feeling that crawls under your skin and makes every nerve scream. Lily had only been in the house for 5 minutes when it started. A whisper. A soft, barely audible sound breathed through the dusty, rotting walls. She froze. She wasn't alone. She couldn't be. The house had been abandoned for decades, and yet the faint echo of a voice, too clear to be imagined, tickled the edge of her hearing, sending a shiver down her spine. "Who's there?" Her voice was a nervous tremor, barely a whisper in itself. The only response was the steady creaking of the floorboards, as if the house itself was breathing. "Hello?" she asked again, her voice thick with fear. It was then that the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening force. Lily's heart hammered as the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath became visible in the frigid air, but she couldn't move. The shadows around her seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. A figure. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, a distorted image in the corner of the room. But when she turned her head to face it directly, there was no mistaking the horrific presence standing just beyond her reach. It was a man, or something that once was. His eyes were hollow, black voids, and his mouth hung open in a ghastly grin that didn't belong to anything human. "Please don't," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible, but the figure took a step forward, and then another. She could feel his breath on her neck, cold and rancid, like the smell of rot. Her legs gave out, sending her crashing to the ground, but she couldn't look away. "Leave this place," a voice rasped from the shadows. It was low, guttural, and as if the air itself was choking on its own existence. Lily scrambled back against the wall, her pulse racing as the darkness seemed to press in closer. She couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It was everywhere, suffocating her. "This house is not for the living." Lily's mind spun. She had come here to investigate, to uncover the truth about the old house on Hollow Hill. It had been the source of whispered stories in town for years, but Lily wasn't one to be easily intimidated, not by rumors, not by superstition. But this was real. The weight of it pressed on her chest, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, but the screen wouldn't light up. Panic surged through her, and she slapped the phone against her palm repeatedly. It flickered to life for just a second, enough to show a message. "Help me." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't typed that. No one else could have sent it. She turned to look around the room, trying to make sense of it, but the air grew colder and the shadows darkened further. Then she heard it again. "Help me." The voice was clearer now, but it wasn't coming from her phone. It came from the far corner of the room, a ragged whisper that seemed to claw at her sanity. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Only the primal urge to escape remained. She leapt to her feet, only to have the door slam shut once more. The room was smaller now, the walls closing in. "What do you want from me?" Lily screamed, but her voice was drowned by the oppressive silence that followed. From the corner, she saw the figure again, creeping slowly toward her. She backed away, but the figure moved faster now, its eyes wide and vacant. I can't leave," it spoke with a voice that sounded like it was being dragged from a grave. You won't leave either." Lily was losing her grip on reality. The figure was now inches from her, and she could feel its cold presence, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She stumbled backward into the mirror that hung on the wall. The glass cracked under her touch, sending a shiver down her spine. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the reflection, even though she knew she shouldn't. She had to move. She had to escape. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. But the house wasn't empty. She could feel its presence all around her, alive, watching, waiting. The whispers returned, now a chorus of voices, all pleading, all warning. "You have to get out, now!" The voice was sharp, urgent, a frantic plea. It was coming from the mirror, but there was no reflection, only an endless blackness that pulled at her very soul. Lily spun around, desperate, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. She ran toward the door, slamming her shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. She pulled, yanked, and slammed again. "No, no, no!" Ah! The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like an angry wind. "Leave, leave!" The voices screamed, overlapping, pulling at her sanity, dragging her down into the darkness. In that moment, she heard something else. A slow, deliberate knock. At first, she thought it was just the house settling, but no. The knock was real, louder this time, right behind her. Lily spun around, her eyes wide with terror. There, standing at the threshold of the room, was another figure, taller, more twisted, its face a grotesque mask of decay. "You're not meant to be here," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "You shouldn't have come. Now you'll never leave." Her heart raced as the figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. A chill ran down her spine. She reached for the door again, but it was too late. The figure's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with an inhuman strength. "You can't escape," it whispered. "Not from them." Lily's body went numb with fear as the shadows seemed to come alive, curling around her, suffocating her in their cold embrace. She could feel them closing in, could hear their whispers. So many voices, so many souls trapped in this house, all longing for release. The figure dragged her toward the center of the room, her feet scraping against the floor as if the house itself was trying to swallow her whole. She fought back, desperate, kicking and screaming, but it was useless. The shadows were everywhere, pulling her in, drowning her in their cold, dark tendrils. Her mind screamed for release, for escape, but she couldn't get away. The house was alive. It was hungry, and it had claimed her as its own. The door, once solid and unyielding, creaked open of its own accord. The figure stopped, its hollow eyes narrowing as it let go of her wrist. "You have a choice now," it said, its voice twisting in her mind. "You can leave, but you'll take their place." Lily didn't understand. She couldn't. Then, with a deafening crash, the floor beneath her buckled, sending her plunging into the darkness below. She fell, and the last thing she heard was the cacophony of voices, hundreds of them, all crying out in unison, "Welcome home." The house had claimed another soul.